Why was she hiding in plain sight? Jordan Pike's hands moved with the same mechanical precision she once used on a rifle trigger. Clipboards, boxes, ammunition magazines lined up in gray steel crates. The fluorescent lights above the depot buzzed, harsh and unkind, painting her shadow across the concrete floor like a ghost she couldn't quite escape. To anyone watching, she was nothing more than a contractor, a logistics worker who preferred numbers to people. And that was the point. 8 months of counting magazines had carved a rhythm she could depend on. Numbers didn't ask questions. They didn't look into your eyes and wonder what you had seen. They didn't demand explanations about scars no one could see. But the sound of boots told her this morning would be different. Measured steps, confident, not the shuffle of tired contractors or the hurried jog of enlisted soldiers late to their posts. This was someone accustomed to command, someone whose very presence altered the air. She didn't look up right away, not until the shadow stopped at her table. "Excuse me," a voice said, firm, weathered, carrying the weight of decades. "I need to check something on your inventory sheet." Jordan handed over her clipboard without hesitation. Her face didn't move. She had perfected this stillness. It was the only armor she had left. Colonel's eyes scanned the page with casual interest, at first seeing nothing more than neat rows of numbers, careful handwriting, precise notation. Then his gaze froze. His grip tightened almost imperceptibly. The faded stamp at the top of the page should have been erased long ago. Yet there it was, just visible if you knew where to look. 2 words. Blue Phantom. His chest hollowed. He had heard that code name in whispered rooms, briefing halls, and among special operations officers who rarely whispered about anything. A sniper with nearly 300 confirmed kills. Missions buried under redacted reports. The kind of legend people swore was already dead. 3 years ago, Blue Phantom had gone missing, presumed killed in a valley where even survival felt impossible. And yet she stood here, quiet, counting ammunition like death had never touched her. Jordan extended her hand, reclaiming the clipboard with a steady grace. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. If the colonel had questions, he would need to drag them out one by one. She turned back to the magazines, finishing her count, her hands moving with that same practiced steadiness. But inside, her mind was already shifting. The silence she had built around herself, the fragile anonymity of a contractor's life, was cracking. The colonel knew. She had left the stamp on the clipboard on purpose, not by accident, a small rebellion, a way of telling herself she wasn't gone, even if the world insisted she was. Officially, Blue Phantom had died in Afghanistan. Unofficially, she had been pieced back together in a hospital bed, given new papers, a new name, and told to disappear. Now the one thing she feared and longed for had arrived: recognition. Didn't speak of it then. He handed back the clipboard, but his eyes lingered. That sharpness of command in them had shifted into something else: curiosity and respect. She knew what would follow: questions, conversations, decisions that could unmake the fragile routine she had built. But for now she counted. One magazine after another, each weight in her hand pulling her back through memories she tried not to touch. The rifle scope pressed against her eye, the stillness before the shot, the targets who never knew her face, and the silence after silence that screamed louder than gunfire. By noon she could feel the weight of stares from her. The colonel's visit hadn't gone unnoticed. Dave Martinez, her supervisor, strolled over with his usual cheer. "Everything okay over here, Jordan?" She smiled faintly, practiced, routine. Colonel just needed some numbers checked. That was enough for Dave. He never pressed for more. It was one of the reasons she respected him. He saw her as reliable, nothing else, and she had worked hard to keep it that way. But wasn't like Dave. He had seen the faded ink, and men like him didn't ignore ghosts who refused to stay buried. When the day ended, Jordan drove through the security gates in her modest sedan. She kept her eyes moving, scanning for tails, a habit she couldn't break. The guards waved her through, oblivious. To them, she was no one, just another contractor heading home to a quiet apartment. The apartment was small, Spartan. Every piece of furniture placed with intention, sight lines to the doors, concealment where she might need it. A soldier's home disguised as a civilian's life. She cooked a simple meal, ate slowly, watched the news without really listening. Her mind replayed pause, the tightening of his grip on the clipboard, the flicker in his eyes. Tomorrow, she knew, the silence would break. And it did. The colonel was waiting when she arrived at the depot the next morning. His expression told her everything. He had spent the night thinking, digging, remembering. "Ms. Pike," he said, using her civilian name as if testing how well it fit her. "I hope you don't mind. I arranged for us to have that conversation I mentioned yesterday." She placed her bag down carefully, masking the unease threading through her chest. "I have time before my shift." He led her into a small office, the kind with walls thin enough to hear the hum of the warehouse outside, but private enough for words that mattered. She chose her seat deliberately, back to the wall, view of the exit. Old habits never died. Sat across from her. "I reviewed some records last night, classified records." His tone was careful, like someone stepping across broken glass. "I want you to know I don't intend to disrupt your life here, but I can't ignore what I've discovered." Jordan's face remained still. The discipline of silence was one of the few tools she still trusted. He leaned forward. "You've been given this contractor's role, yes, but I don't think counting magazines is the full measure of your ability, and frankly, it would be a waste." She finally spoke, her voice even. "I've found the work suits me. Numbers don't lie, they don't bleed." The colonel studied her carefully. He had seen soldiers break. He had seen soldiers hide, but this was different. She wasn't broken. She was buried. "There's a program starting here," he said. "Advanced marksmanship, special operations. We need someone who's walked the edge, someone who can teach what isn't in the manuals, someone who understands that one wrong breath can decide a life." The words lingered. The offer wasn't a command, but it wasn't nothing either. It was a doorway. Jordan didn't answer right away. She weighed the risks. Teaching meant stepping closer to the world she had left. It meant risking recognition, memories, nights where sleep would not come. But it also meant something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months: purpose. "I'll think about it," she said. Slid a card across the table, his direct number. "Take your time, but don't take too long." She pocketed the card, expression neutral. Inside, though, her pulse thudded with something she couldn't quite name. Not fear, not hope, something between. When she returned to her station, her hands moved automatically over the magazines, but her mind was elsewhere. Words echoed. A program, teaching, passing on what she knew without pulling the trigger herself. She tried to push it away, tried to drown herself in the rhythm of counting. But the seed had already been planted. That night she sat in her apartment, staring at the phone. His card rested on the table, his words whispered in her mind. Someone who's walked the edge. The weight of choice pressed against her chest. For years, the military had decided her life for her, declared her dead, erased her name, pushed her into anonymity. But now, for the first time, the choice was hers. And choices, she knew, were heavier than any weapon. What did it mean to be alive, if the world believed you were dead? Jordan sat alone in her apartment, staring at its card. The numbers on it were just ink, but they pulsed in her vision like coordinates she wasn't sure she wanted to follow. She had lived with silence for so long, silence of memory, silence of purpose. Picking up that phone meant breaking it. She told herself she'd wait, think, analyze like she always had before pulling a trigger, but she knew the truth. The decision was already creeping into her bones. The next morning at the depot felt different. Every sound seemed sharper. Every glance from seemed to linger too long. She tried to sink into routine, to let the rhythm of numbers soothe her. but the seed had sprouted. Appeared again, not hovering, not pushing, just there, watching with the patience of a man who had led soldiers through more than one battlefield. By noon, Jordan couldn't stand it. The magazines she handled seemed heavier. Each one carried the question she had avoided for years. Was she finished or just hiding? That night she dialed the number. Her voice when the colonel answered was calm, neutral. "I'll do it." Didn't sound surprised. He only said, "Good, we'll start the paperwork tomorrow." And just like that, the silence broke. The transition moved faster than she expected. 2 weeks. That was all it took for the machine to turn her from contractor to instructor. Her cover story remained intact, a civilian with extensive marksmanship experience, brought in to help train a new wave of operators. No mention of Blue Phantom, no mention of the valley where she was supposed to have died. The facility was tucked into a remote edge of Fort Henderson, clean, modern with both indoor and outdoor ranges. Purpose-built. Jordan toured it with at her side, his words steady but his eyes sharp, watching how she reacted to every sight. The smell of gun oil, the echo of shots in the distance, the weight of rifles lined in racks, all of it hit her like ghosts whispering from the past. She kept her breathing steady, kept her movements deliberate. She would not let him see how deep it cut. "This will be your office," said, gesturing to a small room with a window overlooking the range. Her eyes caught on the view. Targets lined up under the morning sun, empty for now, waiting. She imagined the students that would come, young faces, some eager, some scared, some thinking they knew everything, none of them knowing what it truly meant to align a scope and decide who lived or died. She nodded once. "It'll work." The first class arrived on a Monday. 12 students. Different branches, different ranks, but the same intensity in their eyes. Operators, chosen because they were already the best of the best. Jordan stood in front of them, the contractor badge on her uniform a thin mask. She introduced herself with few words. No grand speeches. No promises, just, "You're here to learn how to survive with a rifle in your hands. My job is to make sure you don't miss when it matters." At first she kept it simple. Fundamentals, breathing, trigger discipline, reading wind. Things any competent shooter should know, but she wasn't just watching their skills. She was watching them, who cracked under pressure, who hid fear behind arrogance, who listened. Slowly she began to weave in more. The details only someone who had lived it could teach. How to trust the stillness between heartbeats. How to feel distance rather than measure it. How to listen to silence, because silence told you more than sound ever could. Her students noticed. Respect grew. Not because she demanded it, but because they could sense something in her that wasn't in manuals. Something raw, something earned. But teaching meant remembering, and remembering meant pain. At night in her apartment, Jordan found herself staring at her old rifle, locked away for years. Her hands itched to feel its weight. She resisted, then gave in. Cleaning it was muscle memory. Every click, every smooth pull of the cloth down the barrel, every adjustment of the scope. It was like her body remembered things her mind wanted to forget. In the mirror, she caught her own reflection, civilian haircut, plain contractor uniform folded on the chair. But behind her eyes, she could still see Blue Phantom staring back. Was this acceptance or relapse? Weeks passed, the program grew, word spread. Students left her classes sharper, calmer, more lethal, and alive. One evening, stopped by her office. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're making an impression." Jordan didn't look up from the rifle she was inspecting. "They're learning. That's what matters." "That's not all," he said quietly. "They're talking about you, about how different you are, how you teach things they've never heard before." She paused, setting the rifle down. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "That a problem?" Shook his head. "No, it's exactly why I asked you to do this. But it means sooner or later, someone's going to start asking the right questions." Her jaw tightened. That was the risk. She had accepted it the moment she picked up the phone. One student in particular stayed in her thoughts, a young lieutenant, barely seasoned, sharp eyes but unsteady hands. He reminded her of herself in her early days, eager but untested. She watched him struggle with calculations, with confidence. During one session, after his shot strayed wide again, she called him aside. "You're thinking too much," she told him. "You're trying to control every variable. That's not how it works. Control what you can, trust what you can't." He looked at her, frustration on his face. "What if I get it wrong?" Jordan's voice dropped, softer. "You will, everyone does. The question is, what do you do next? Freeze, or breathe, adjust, and take the shot anyway." His eyes shifted, understanding dawning. He nodded. As she watched him return to the line, Jordan felt something she hadn't in years. Pride. Not the pride of hitting a target herself, the pride of passing something on. But pride came with its own danger. Pride meant connection. Connection meant vulnerability. And Jordan had built her life on avoiding both. Late one night, after a long training cycle, she found herself sitting alone on the range. The air was cool, the targets invisible in the dark. She thought of the valley where she had almost died, the faces of those who hadn't made it back, the silence of being buried alive in paperwork, declared gone. Why had she survived when others had? Why her? The question never left her, not on the battlefield, not in recovery, not now. But maybe, just maybe, the answer was sitting in the classroom she now led. Maybe survival wasn't meant to be understood. Maybe it was meant to be used. 2 months after she began, returned with news. "There's interest from higher up," he said carefully. "They like the numbers. They like what your students are bringing back from deployment." Jordan leaned back wary. Higher up always comes with strings. He didn't deny it. For now, it's good. It means support, resources, but it also means visibility. She knew what that meant. The higher the visibility, the thinner the mask of Jordan Pike became, and the closer Blue Phantom came to being exposed. She walked to the window, looking out at the range, at the wind shifting the flags. Visibility gets people killed. His voice softened, or it saves them, depending on how you use it. Jordan didn't answer, but the truth pressed in. She could keep hiding or she could step forward. Either way, the world was coming for her. And she would have to decide whether to face it as Jordan Pike, or as the ghost the world thought was gone. What happens when the life you buried comes knocking at the door? The classroom smelled faintly of gun oil and paper targets. Jordan stood at the firing line, arms folded, watching her students execute a drill she had designed to push them to the edge of control. 10 shots. No more than 2 seconds between each trigger pull. Every miss cost the entire team a repeat. The pressure was intentional. Real combat didn't allow for comfort. She kept her face still, but inside her heartbeat quickened. Watching young operators steady their rifles always pulled her back to nights on mountainsides, to the weight of a scope against her eye, to the quiet before a storm of violence. She never told her students that part. She gave them the tools, the principles, the math, but the ghost stayed her own. When the final shot rang out and the targets dropped clean, she gave a small nod. Approval without words. It was enough. The students lowered their rifles, breathing heavy, sweat running down their necks. Pride flickered in their faces, pride she had helped build. And for the first time in years, Jordan felt a trace of it herself. Not pride in killing, but in preparing others to survive. That evening she sat in her office, paperwork spread before her. She was drafting training notes when the knock came, sharp, intentional. "Come in," she said without looking up. The man who entered he wasn't anyone she knew. Civilian suit, too sharp for a base visit. His badge said Department of Defense, but his eyes said something colder. "Ms. Pike," he greeted, closing the door softly behind him. "My name is Mr." Jordan set her pen down slowly. "You're not on my schedule." "I don't follow schedules," replied. His voice was quiet even, but it carried the weight of someone accustomed to sensitive conversations. I follow loose ends. Her body tensed, but her face remained still. And you think I'm one of those? I know you are. He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. Relax, this isn't an interrogation. I didn't come to tear down the life you've built. Quite the opposite. Jordan didn't move, didn't breathe. Silence was her weapon. Let it hang before continuing. Your existence isn't as secret as you may think. Certain people know. The right people. The ones who decided to let Blue Phantom stay buried and let Jordan Pike rise. The name, her ghost's name, filled the air like a shot fired in a quiet room. His tone softened. Your work here matters. It honors your past while serving the present, and it has the full approval of those who matter. He didn't linger. He didn't threaten. He left as quietly as he had arrived, the door shutting with a soft click that seemed far too loud in the empty office. Jordan sat for a long time, staring at the papers before her. Her hand hovered above the pen but didn't move. She thought she wanted recognition. She thought she wanted proof she still mattered. But official was dangerous. It meant she was still a piece on someone's board. And pieces could be moved or sacrificed. The next morning stopped by. He didn't mention, but she could tell by his eyes he knew. Don't let it shake you, he said. Jordan didn't respond. Instead, she asked, how long before this quiet life I've built collapses? Sigh was long, heavy. That depends on you. Days became weeks. The students kept coming. The program grew. Word spread through the base and beyond. Officers requested slots for their men. Units whispered about the instructor who taught them things the manuals couldn't. Jordan tried to stay detached, tried to remind herself this was temporary, fragile, but one face kept breaking through her armor. The young lieutenant, the one who once asked, "What if I get it wrong?" He was improving, slowly, painfully, but improving. Jordan caught herself watching him longer than the others, guiding him more, feeling something dangerously close to hope. Hope was not safe. Hope was a crack in the wall. One evening the range was quiet, students gone, sun dipping below the horizon. Jordan stayed behind, rifle in hand, eyes down the scope. The target blurred and sharpened as she adjusted. She exhaled slowly, the world narrowing. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. The familiar calm wrapped around her like a forgotten coat. Not adrenaline, not fear, just silence. The kind of silence she once lived inside. The shot cracked across the range. The target dropped, perfect. Her chest rose and fell. She lowered the rifle, staring at it in her lap. For months she had resisted this moment. For months she had told herself she was done. But she knew the truth now. The sniper was still inside her, not gone, not dead, just waiting. And teaching was only keeping her on the edge. The next week brought a surprise she hadn't prepared for. She walked into the training facility to find a visitor waiting. Was there, standing beside him. A tall man, scar across his cheek, uniform crisp. General Hawkins, introduced. The general's handshake was firm, her eyes sharp. Instructor Pike, I've heard about your program. Jordan nodded, neutral, silent. Hawkins wasted no time. We're assembling a joint task force, special operations, the kind of mission where precision shooting will make or break the outcome. Jordan's jaw tightened. The words alone carried her back to valleys she had buried. Hawkins studied her. Your students are good, but this mission requires something more. We need your expertise, not in the field, not yet, but in preparing them, designing training scenarios that replicate what they'll face. Jordan's throat went dry. She had sworn she'd never go back, not even close. But the general wasn't asking. She was inviting, testing. His voice broke the silence. It's consultation, nothing more. You won't be briefed on targets, just conditions, terrain, environment. The choice pressed down on her chest. She could say no. She could cling to the fragile life she had built. But if she did, would others die because of it? She remembered the young lieutenant's face. His question, what if I get it wrong? Jordan inhaled slowly. I'll need specifics, environmental data, equipment, nothing else. The general nodded once. Done. That night sleep didn't come. Jordan sat in the dark of her apartment, the city lights outside blurred by the window. Her rifle lay across her knees, cleaned, polished, ready. She hated herself for it, but in some twisted way, she also felt alive again. The silence wasn't gone, it was just waiting. And she knew the moment she agreed to help, she had stepped back into its grip. How do you train others for the impossible without reliving it yourself? The range was unrecognizable. Jordan had spent weeks tearing apart the usual drills and rebuilding them into something harsher, something closer to the conditions she knew the task force would face. Altitude chambers, variable weather simulations, wind machines that whipped across the targets with cruel unpredictability. She didn't explain why she was doing it. She didn't have to. Her students could feel the change. The drills weren't about skill anymore. They were about survival. 6 operators had been chosen for the mission. All of them graduates of her earlier classes. All of them sharper than most soldiers would ever dream of being. And yet, as they crouched in the dirt, rifles trembling in the cold wind she had ordered cranked up, she saw the same flicker in their eyes she remembered in her own doubt. Again, she commanded. Her voice was calm, flat, but inside she was back there, in the valleys, in the mountains, in the silence before a shot that could change the outcome of a war. The team adjusted, fired, misses. Again. They pushed harder, sweat, curses, a crack in the youngest one's voice. Jordan didn't soften. She couldn't, the enemy wouldn't. After the session, she noticed one of them, Sergeant Maria Santos, sitting apart, her hands trembling as she cleaned her weapon. Jordan approached quietly, sat beside her. For a moment neither spoke. Then Santos whispered, "It's too much. The conditions, the pressure, I can't." Jordan's voice cut through gently. The hardest part isn't making the shot. It's believing you can when everything around you tells you it's impossible. Santos looked at her, eyes wide, searching. And how do you believe it? Jordan hesitated. For once she let the silence stretch. Then, you don't, not at first, you prepare, you fail, you prepare again. And eventually belief stops mattering. You just act, because not acting is worse. Santos breathed deeply, nodding slowly. The tremor in her hand stilled. Jordan stood, leaving her with the rifle. She walked back toward the shadows of the range, her chest tight. The words had come too easily. They weren't theory, they were scars. Nights blurred into days, training consumed her. The 6 operators were pushed to limits they hadn't known existed. Jordan's drills broke them down, rebuilt them, broke them again. She watched their faces transform, the arrogance stripped away, the fear buried deeper. What replaced it was something sharper, colder, the edge she knew well. But as they hardened, so did the ghosts. Jordan woke in the night with her heart pounding, drenched in sweat. She saw flashes of the valley, heard the echoes of gunfire, the faces of teammates who hadn't made it. She sat in the dark, gripping her rifle, fighting the urge to scream. Silence was her only refuge. Silence and work. One evening, stopped by her office. He found her hunched over maps and charts, red pens circling areas of simulated terrain. "You're driving them hard," he observed. Jordan didn't look up, not hard enough. Leaned on the doorframe. "They're good, Jordan, better than most. You've given them what they need." Her pen froze. Slowly she raised her eyes to him. "No, I've given them what I can. What I can't give them is the moment." Tilted his head, "The moment." She stared past him, her gaze distant. The moment when everything collapses, when nothing goes according to plan, when you're alone, when silence is the only voice you hear, and you have to decide in one heartbeat whether to pull the trigger or not. I can't give them that. And that's the only thing that matters. Her words hung heavy in the air. Didn't argue. He just nodded once, then left her to the maps and the ghosts that would not let her rest. The final week of training arrived. The team gathered at the remote range for one last scenario, a brutal exercise Jordan had designed to push them beyond their limits. The conditions were merciless: high wind, low visibility, targets at distances even seasoned snipers struggled to believe were possible. The team lined up, rifles steady but breath ragged. Jordan paced behind them, silent. She didn't shout. She didn't instruct. She let the silence press in until it was unbearable. Then she said simply, "Take the shot." The crack of rifles split the air. Misses, adjustments, more misses. Jordan's voice calm as ice. "Breathe again." One by one, the shots found their marks. Not all perfect, but close, close enough to mean survival. When the last target dropped, the team sagged with exhaustion. Some smiled weakly. Some just stared at the ground as if trying to process what they had just endured. Jordan remained still, hands behind her back, expression unreadable. Inside, her chest was burning, not with pride, not with fear, with something she didn't dare name. Maybe hope, maybe grief, maybe both. General Hawkins returned the next day. She watched the final evaluations, her sharp eyes tracking every movement of the team. When it was done, she pulled Jordan aside. "They're ready," Hawkins said simply, "and that's because of you." Jordan shook her head. "They're ready because they refuse to break." The general studied her. "You've given them more than training. You've given them a piece of yourself. Don't underestimate the value of that." Jordan didn't reply. She couldn't. Her throat was too tight. That night, alone in her apartment, Jordan sat at the table staring at her old clipboard. The faded stamp. The two words that had once defined her. Blue Phantom. She traced the ink with her fingertip, the way she once traced the contours of a rifle scope. She whispered the name under her breath, not as an identity, but as a ghost. For the first time, she wondered if teaching had been less about giving others her knowledge, and more about finding a way to forgive herself for surviving when so many hadn't. The mission would take her students far away. She wouldn't know the details. She wouldn't hear the outcomes. That was the deal. And yet she knew the truth. Part of her was going with them. Part of her would always go. Because silence doesn't end when you leave the battlefield. Sometimes it follows you home. What happens when the people you've prepared walk into danger, and you're left behind? The facility was quiet, too quiet. For weeks, it had been filled with the echo of rifle shots, the bark of orders, the grind of drills that left soldiers trembling with exhaustion. Now the ranges were empty, the chambers still. The 6 operators she had broken down and rebuilt were gone, deployed into a mission whose details she would never know. Jordan sat at her desk, staring at the absence. Their absence. It should have been a relief. The pressure was over. The responsibility passed on. She had done her part. But the silence gnawed. She thought of Sergeant Santos, her hands once trembling, now steady. Of the young lieutenant who had asked, "What if I get it wrong?" and learned to breathe through his fear. She thought of each of them stepping into darkness with lessons she had drilled into their bones. And she thought of the one thing she couldn't give them. The moment when all preparation ends and only instinct decides. Found her still at her desk that evening. The lamp cast harsh light across the maps and notes she hadn't bothered to put away. "They'll be fine," he said softly. Jordan didn't look up. "You don't know that. I know you gave them what no one else could." Her jaw clenched. She finally raised her eyes, sharp and weary. "That doesn't stop bullets, Colonel. That doesn't keep them alive when the silence comes." Sighed, "No, but it gives them a fighting chance, and that's more than most get." His words should have comforted her. Instead, they reminded her of every name etched into memory, every soldier she couldn't save, every shot she hadn't been able to take in time. Left her to the silence. Days turned to weeks. Training continued for new students, but Jordan's focus faltered. She watched young faces come and go, but her mind was elsewhere, halfway across the world, imagining mountains, deserts, cities she might once have walked through with a rifle in her hands. Sleep grew harder. Dreams came sharper. Sometimes she woke with her hand reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Sometimes she wondered if she should have gone with them. One evening the phone rang. Not the base, a number she didn't recognize. She answered cautiously, "Pike." A pause, then a voice she hadn't heard in years. Rough, strained, but unmistakable. "Jordan." Her chest froze, her breath caught. As she whispered, "Captain," a name buried in her past. A man she had left behind in that Afghan valley where Blue Phantom had died and Jordan Pike had been born. "I thought," his voice cracked, "I thought you were dead." Jordan's fingers gripped the phone. "You weren't supposed to know otherwise." "I was medevaced out before the reports came in," said, his words tumbling fast, raw. "They told me no one survived. I carried that with me. I carried you with me." Her throat tightened. She wanted to end the call, hang up, vanish back into silence, but something in his voice stopped her. Guilt. The same guilt she carried. 2 days later he arrived. Not as a ghost, but as a flesh-and-blood man in uniform, scars across his face, eyes haunted. Officially, he was there for an instructor exchange program. Unofficially, Jordan knew the truth. He had come to find her. Their first meeting was brief, professional in front of others. But his eyes betrayed him, shock, disbelief, and something deeper. That night he came to her office, closed the door. "I saw you go down," said. His voice trembled with years of weight. "I saw you fall. I thought it was my fault. I've lived with that every day." Jordan kept her expression still, though her hands curled tight on the desk. "It wasn't your fault." "You don't understand," he pressed. "I thought I left you. I thought I abandoned you." Her eyes snapped to his, hard and sharp. "You didn't. I lived. That's all that matters." But they both knew that wasn't true. Survival had costs, costs neither of them had stopped paying. For the first time in years, Jordan broke her silence. She told him, carefully, guardedly, about recovery, about being erased, about the life of counting magazines that had become her penance. Listened, his face shifting between relief and grief. "I carried your death like a scar," he admitted, "and now I don't know what to do with the truth." Jordan's chest ached. She wanted to tell him to forget, to walk away. But another part of her, the part that had watched her students learn to breathe through fear, wanted to tell him he wasn't alone. For hours they spoke, carefully, painfully. The words pulled memories she had buried too deep, but with each one she felt a weight she hadn't realized she still carried shift slightly. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. His presence on base didn't go unnoticed. Other instructors saw the familiarity between them. Rumors stirred, questions whispered. Jordan kept her composure, she always had, but noticed. He pulled her aside one afternoon, his gaze steady. "Knows," he said. Jordan nodded once. "You trust him?" She hesitated. "I don't know if I trust anyone anymore." Studied her for a long moment. Then, "Maybe that's the point, maybe you need to." The weeks of assignment passed in a blur. They trained together, taught side by side, their professional roles a fragile mask over the truth between them. At night, they spoke quietly, unraveling threads of memory, stitching them into something that felt almost like understanding. One evening, after a brutal training session that echoed their last deployment, lingered behind. "You're different now," he said softly. Jordan tilted her head. "So are you. The skills are the same, but the way you carry them, it's changed. You don't just pull the trigger anymore. You teach others how to." She let the silence stretch, then replied, "Killing isn't the legacy I wanted." He gave a small, sad smile. "Maybe survival is." When his assignment ended, his farewell was simple. No speeches, no promises, just a look that carried everything words couldn't. "I'm glad you're alive," he said finally, "and I'm glad you found a way to keep serving without losing yourself." For a long time after he left, Jordan sat alone in her office, staring at the empty chair across from her. His presence had stirred old wounds, yes, but it had also given her something she hadn't expected. Closure, and in a way, permission. Permission to stop being the ghost of Blue Phantom. Permission to live as Jordan Pike. But ghosts don't disappear so easily. The 6 operators she had trained were still out there, their silence pressed against her like a weight. Every morning she walked into the facility. Every day she taught. Every night she stared at the phone, waiting for a call that might never come. And in the quietest hours, she whispered to herself, "They have to come back, they have to." Because if they didn't, then all she had done, all she had risked, would mean nothing. And Jordan Pike could not bear another silence filled only with names carved in memory. How long can silence last before it breaks? The days dragged. The range echoed with gunfire, but Jordan's ears weren't listening. She heard only absence. The 6 operators she had trained gone into shadows, carrying pieces of her with them. Every sunrise that passed without news carved deeper lines in her chest. She never asked, never demanded updates. That wasn't the deal. She had agreed to train, not to know. But each night she stared at the phone, waiting for it to ring, hoping it wouldn't, fearing it would. And then, one morning, it did. His voice was steady, official. "They're back." Jordan's grip on the phone tightened. All of them. A pause too long. Most said quietly. The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. The memorial was small, private. Only those with clearance could attend. 2 names. 2 soldiers who had breathed her lessons, carried her words, and still hadn't made it home. Jordan stood in the back, expression unreadable, hands clenched behind her. She didn't join the prayers, didn't add her voice to the condolences. Her silence was her mourning. When the ceremony ended, Sergeant Santos found her. Her uniform was pressed, her movements sharp, but her eyes betrayed her. "They were ready," Santos said firmly, as if trying to convince herself. "We were ready. They didn't die because of training. They died because that's what happens sometimes." Jordan looked at her, at the steadiness in her voice, the weight in her eyes. The same weight Jordan had carried for years. "They died," Jordan said softly, "because the world doesn't care how ready you are." Santos held her gaze. "But the rest of us came home because of what you taught." Jordan didn't respond, couldn't. Her throat was too tight. Santos gave a small nod, then walked away. For the first time in years, Jordan felt tears pressing. She blinked them back, swallowing them like poison. She had survived. Santos had survived. But the names carved in memory grew longer, always longer. Rumors spread quickly through Fort Henderson. Whispers that the new task force had performed beyond expectations, hitting targets no one thought possible. Whispers that their preparation had been brutal, almost inhuman, and exactly what saved them. And whispers about their instructor. Jordan heard her own name carried in hushed voices she wasn't meant to hear. "Pike, the civilian. She's different." Some spoke with admiration, others with unease, but all carried the same undertone: she wasn't ordinary. She walked through the halls, eyes down, mask on, but inside her chest tightened. The mask was cracking. Blue Phantom's shadow was stretching again. One afternoon called her into his office. She entered cautiously, scanning the room. He wasn't alone. Mister was there, the man from the Department of Defense. Jordan's body stiffened, but her face remained stone. Gave a small smile. "Good to see you again, Ms. Pike." She didn't return it. "Why am I here?" His voice was measured. "Because your training has drawn attention." Jordan's jaw tightened. That was inevitable. Folded his hands neatly on the desk. The mission was a success. The team performed beyond projections. Your methods are being noticed, not just here but beyond. Jordan's eyes narrowed. Beyond. Allied forces, clarified. There are requests, invitations. Other nations want their operators exposed to your instruction. They believe what you've built here could save lives across theaters. Her heart pounded. The idea of traveling, of teaching elsewhere, it was tempting, yes, but it also meant visibility, exposure. No, she said flatly. Frowned Jordan. She cut him off. No, I agreed to this program, nothing more. Studied her calmly. You can't hide forever, not when what you've built is saving lives. Her voice dropped cold. I'm not hiding, I'm surviving. The silence in the room thickened, finally nodded, almost with respect. Survival has its cost, but so does refusing to step forward. He stood, smoothed his suit, and left without another word. Watched her for a long time after. He's right, you know, you're not just surviving anymore. Jordan turned sharply, her eyes burning. And what happens when someone recognizes me? When someone says the name I'm not supposed to have? Didn't flinch. Then you deal with it the way you've dealt with everything else, by facing it head on. That night Jordan sat in her apartment, the silence crushing. She thought of Santos, alive because of her lessons. She thought of the two names added to the memorial wall. She thought of words, warning. And for the first time in years, she opened the box she had kept locked away in the back of her closet. Inside, beneath folded cloth and photographs she rarely dared touch, lay her old sniper rifle. Her hands shook as she lifted it, not from fear, from memory. The weight was the same, the cold metal against her cheek, the steady heartbeat that aligned with her finger on the trigger. She looked through the scope, across the dim apartment at nothing but walls and shadows. But in her mind she was back in the silence before the shot. She lowered the rifle slowly. If Blue Phantom was truly dead, why did it feel so much like she had just come back to life? Weeks passed. Requests from outside units kept coming. Shielded her as best he could, but he couldn't block everything. Officers began visiting her classes, observing, asking questions. Jordan kept her mask steady, teaching as Pike, never as Phantom. But she felt it, the edges of her secret fraying. And then it happened. During a training exercise, one of the students, a seasoned sergeant, watched her closely, too closely. After class, he lingered. You ever deployed? He asked casually. Jordan froze for a fraction of a second, too long. The sergeant's eyes narrowed. Because the way you move, the way you talk, that's not just theory, that's someone who's been there. Jordan forced a small smile. I've been around. But inside her pulse thundered. The cracks were widening, and she knew the truth, no mask holds forever. That night she returned to the clipboard, the faded stamp, Blue Phantom. She had left it there as defiance, as memory. Now it felt like a signal flare. Part of her wanted to burn it, to erase the ghost once and for all. But another part, the part that had watched her students survive because of her lessons, whispered that maybe the ghost had never been hers to kill. Maybe Blue Phantom wasn't a burden, maybe she was a legacy. And Jordan Pike would have to decide which she truly was. What happens when the world begins to see you again, before you're ready? The facility was busier than ever. Jordan walked its halls like a ghost in plain sight, blending in with the instructors and officers who passed her by. But she felt the difference. Eyes followed her now, not openly, not rudely, just curious, measuring. She had spent years living unseen. Now she felt like every step echoed too loudly. The whispers had grown. The task force she trained had not only survived, they had excelled. After-action reports praised their precision under impossible conditions, their ability to adapt when everything collapsed. The kind of praise that traveled fast, even when redacted. Other commands wanted to know why. Why them? Why now? And every trail pointed back to the quiet civilian instructor named Pike. It started small. A Canadian liaison requesting observation rights. a British officer sitting in on her drills, a French sniper team suddenly assigned to joint training rotations. Jordan kept her composure, her instruction steady, but inside, every new pair of eyes felt like a spotlight burning through her mask. One afternoon, during a session with the French team, she demonstrated a crosswind adjustment technique, one she hadn't read in manuals but lived through on a mountainside in Helmand. The French captain narrowed his eyes, studying her closely. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. Jordan didn't hesitate. "Experience." "Experience where?" She met his gaze evenly. "Does it matter?" For a moment, silence hung sharp. Then the captain gave a small nod, as if he had heard more than her words. But Jordan walked away with her pulse hammering. The mask was slipping, and not everyone would be content with silence. That night came to her office. He carried a folder under his arm, thick, heavy. He dropped it on her desk. She opened it. Inside were clippings, reports, after-action summaries. All redacted, all incomplete, but together they painted a picture. A picture of her. "Where did you get these?" she demanded. "They're circulating," said grimly. "Not to the public, but within the circles that matter." Jordan's chest tightened. How much do they know? Enough to start guessing, enough to start connecting dots. She closed the folder sharply, then shut it down. His eyes softened. It's not that simple anymore. She wanted to slam her fists on the desk, wanted to scream, but instead she leaned back, silent, her jaw clenched tight. Spoke gently. "You can't stop the whispers, but you can choose how to face them, on your terms or theirs." 2 days later, the whispers became something more. Jordan was leaving the range when she heard it. A voice, low but certain. "Phantom." She froze, turned. The young lieutenant, the same one who had once asked her, "What if I get it wrong?" He stood there, eyes wide, face pale. Her heart thundered. "What did you say?" His voice shook, but he held her gaze. "I read the reports. The training notes didn't match the manuals. I asked questions. I put things together. And then I saw your name, the old one, the one no one says." Jordan's throat closed. For a moment she couldn't breathe. He whispered it again, "Blue Phantom." The words felt like a knife, sharp and cold. She stepped closer, her voice low, fierce. "You don't know what you're talking about." But the lieutenant didn't back down. "I know you're the reason I came back alive. And I know the world thinks you're gone, but you're not. You're here. You saved us before we even stepped into the field." Jordan's mask cracked just for a second. She saw something in his eyes, not accusation, not fear, admiration, reverence. It terrified her more than anything. That night she sat alone with the clipboard again. Blue Phantom. The letters blurred through the sting in her eyes. She had spent years burying that name, years suffocating under silence. Now it was breathing again, not because she had called it back, but because others had. And she didn't know whether to kill it once, and for all, or finally admit it was hers. General Hawkins returned to the base the following week. Jordan met her in his office, the air heavy with unspoken truths. "The whispers are becoming noise," Hawkins said bluntly. "Allied commands are pressing. Some already suspect. The question is not if your identity resurfaces, it's when." Jordan's voice was flat, "And when it does." Hawkins didn't blink. "You become a symbol." Jordan laughed bitterly. "A symbol? I'm not interested in inspiring anyone. I'm not interested in carrying that weight." "You already are," Hawkins replied, "whether you accept it or not." Jordan turned away, staring out the window. The range lay empty, waiting for the next class. Symbols don't survive long. Hawkins's voice softened, almost gentle. Sometimes they don't have to. Sometimes surviving long enough to pass on what matters is enough. The words dug deep, too deep. Jordan said nothing. Later found her in the quiet of the range, rifle resting in her lap. She didn't look at him when he approached. "They'll never stop, will they?" she asked. "No," he admitted, But maybe that's not the curse you think it is. Jordan's grip on the rifle tightened. Then what is it? Crouched beside her, his voice steady. It's a chance to take everything you've carried, the silence, the scars, the ghosts, and turn it into something that outlives you. Something that means the wait wasn't wasted. Jordan closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling slowly. For years she had survived in silence. For months she had taught in the shadows. But now the world was calling her name. Blue Phantom. And sooner or later she would have to answer. How long can you live as two people before the truth decides for you? The day came quietly without warning. No build-up, no dramatic reveal, just a morning like any other until it was. Jordan walked into the training facility expecting the usual hum of drills and chatter. Instead, silence. Students stood in small clusters, their eyes flicking toward her as she passed. Whispers followed her. She entered her office. On her desk lay a folder unmarked but heavy with presents. She opened it and froze. Inside was a single report. Full clearance. Her name, her history. Line by line there it was, the valley, the missions, the kills, the survival no one had been meant to know about. And at the top, stamped in bold, Blue Phantom. Her breath caught. Someone had decided. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. The mask wasn't a mask anymore. The world knew. That afternoon called her into the briefing hall. It was filled, officers, instructors, students, even General Hawkins. Every face turned toward her as she entered. His voice was steady, carrying across the room. You've all asked who she is. You've wondered how one instructor could change so much. Today, you know, this is Jordan Pike, Blue Phantom. The name rang through the hall like a rifle shot. Some faces showed shock, others awe, a few unease, but no one looked away. Jordan stood still, her chest heavy, her mind racing. She wanted to deny it, to run, to bury the ghost again, but she couldn't, not anymore. So she spoke. Her voice was low at first, raw. I never wanted this. I never wanted a name to become a ghost that followed me everywhere. I didn't survive because I was better. I didn't survive because I deserved it. I survived because luck ran out for others before it ran out for me. The room was silent. She felt the weight of every eye, every breath. But survival isn't enough. Silence isn't enough. The only thing that makes survival mean anything is what you do with it. I didn't come back to be a legend. I came back to teach, to make sure fewer names end up on walls no one visits. Her voice steadied, sharpened. If you want to call me Phantom, fine, but don't forget the truth. I'm not a ghost. I'm just someone who learned how heavy silence can be, and I'm tired of carrying it alone. The hall remained still. Then slowly the young lieutenant, the one who had first whispered her, stepped forward. He raised his hand in salute. Others followed, one by one, not because of myth, not because of legend, but because they saw the weight she carried and the strength it took not to collapse beneath it. Jordan's throat tightened. She didn't return the salute. She simply stood there, silent as she always had. Because sometimes silence was enough. The weeks that followed were different. The name traveled quickly. Blue Phantom was no longer a ghost in shadows. She became something else, a story, a lesson, a figure whispered about in halls she had never walked. Students came with sharper questions. Allies came with requests. Some tried to shape her into a symbol, a weapon, a banner to wave. Jordan refused all of it. She didn't want statues. She didn't want myths. She wanted only the range, the students, the passing of knowledge. But she knew now she couldn't hide. Not completely. The world had taken her silence and turned it into an echo. And she had to decide what to do with that echo. One evening she sat alone at the range. The sun dipped low, painting the targets in gold. Her rifle lay across her lap, her hands steady. She thought of the valley, of the names carved in her memory, of haunted eyes, of Santos's trembling hands, of quiet belief. And she thought of the young lieutenant, standing tall, ready to carry forward the lessons she had bled to teach. For years she had asked why she survived, why her, why Blue Phantom. Now, watching the horizon blur into night, she finally understood. Survival wasn't a gift, it was a debt. And teaching, guiding others through the silence, through the fear, through the impossible moments, was the only way she could ever repay it. The world would keep whispering her name. Some would call her legend, some would call her ghost, but Jordan knew the truth. She was neither. She was just a soldier who had chosen not to let silence have the last word. And as the night settled, she whispered one final thought into the quiet, not for herself, but for every soldier who had ever carried scars the world couldn't see. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And with that she lifted her rifle, aligned the scope, breathed in the silence, and fired.